The president wants to spy on 200 million Americans without a warrant. Has he read this document, which he was sworn to uphold?
Now, I will not have you libel Abraham Lincoln.
I don't understand the problem with registering guns. We register cars.
Mark Levine brings you the news the government doesn't want you to know.
Today, an explosive story about connections between white supremacists and Islamic terrorists.
When there's a conflict between Scalia's conservative values and the Constitution of the United States, he throws away the Constitution.
When we do have secret prisons, that is not what America's all about. Let's go to Mark in 5, 4, 3, 2.
Good evening, America. Welcome to the Inside Scoop. I'm your host, Mark Levine. My guest today is Mike Lane, a frequent guest of the Inside Scoop, a Republican strategist. Mike, it's always good to have you here. A lot going on. Next week, March 1st, perhaps, we're going to have a sequester. That's Washington speak for cutting about 9% of every non-Medicare, non-Social Security part of the budget, the defense. It would be everything from Homeland Security to the Federal Aviation Administration to drug safety to, well, just about everything the government does. This is something that both Republicans and Democrats say they don't want, but it's coming unless they do something about it. Will Congress come to a solution? What should that solution be? How do we get in this mess? We'll get on that in just a few minutes. Then I want to talk about gun control because contrary to what my guest said a couple of weeks back, I think we are going to get significant gun control legislation. He may still disagree. Background checks looks like a probable yes. Limiting ammunition clips, probable no. We're going to handicap that. Then the front page of Time Magazine. If you haven't bought Time Magazine in years, and let's face it, a lot of people haven't, go out and buy a copy or get it on the internet. The longest article Time Magazine has ever written, or has ever been written in their magazine, written by Stephen Brill. It's about health care. It's not about covering health care for everyone. That's more what Obamacare was about. It's about why the heck it costs so much. And what can we do about that? And then rounding up the topics, I want to talk about Syria, which is going to even worse levels than it has before. It seems to me the president's out to lunch on this one. I'm a Democrat, but I'm not happy with President Obama on Syria. John Kerry is apparently doing something as a new Secretary of State. Will it be enough? We'll discuss that too. So, Mike, let me start with the sequester, because this is the immediate problem in Washington. It could happen next week. February is a very short month. And this is, of course, was put in place way back in the summer of 2011 when Republicans threatened to default on the national debt, and they scrambled to find something, and they said, well, as long as you do a sequester, as long as you cut across the board, we'll agree to that. Now, we'll try to commission to not do that, and it was going to happen at the end of last year. They extended it till March. They've kicked the can down the road. Here comes the can. It's coming in a week. Before we get to what should happen, let me ask you, what do you think is going to happen on March 1st?
I think it's a 50-50, to be honest with you. The 50% is that the sequester does kick in and we get the
9.4%.
Well, whatever. Any good manager can manage through that. That's not a problem. The other side is that the Republican idea in the House of granting the administration the pick and choose method instead of the across the board method has, I think, a 50% chance of winning. It's going to pass the House. I don't know if Harry Reid will bring it up for a vote in the Senate. We'll see. If it does, I think it'll pass.
You know, the way you characterize the Republican plan actually is sensible. I don't think that's the entire plan. I mean, certainly it makes sense that rather than cutting everything 9.4%, allowing the administrators to decide, well, this program has more fat, this one is more bone, makes perfect sense, and I fully support that. The Democratic plan, though, is to end the sequester by a combination of both tax hikes and spending cuts. The spending cuts are things that you have supported in the past. Cutting agricultural subsidies is the one thing that you and I have agreed on consistently in the past. So I wouldn't think you'd have a problem with that. And the tax hikes, I think you also supported in the past. It's the old Buffett rule. It's the idea that billionaire Warren Buffett pays a lower tax rate than his secretary. That doesn't make sense, that these very rich hedge fund managers don't pay the ordinary income tax rate that janitors and teachers and the rest of us pay. Make them pay the same rate. These are reasonable Democratic proposals that I believe you've supported in the past. What's wrong with the Democratic plan?
Mark, really, I have supported cuts to the farm program,
right?
Agricultural subsidies.
As have I.
I've supported others. There are very few things that I would believe that couldn't be cut. Depending on what the mix is in the final negotiations.
There's some oil subsidies, too, to be cut.
I could do that. I also have told you've had me on the show, I think, on at least 2 occasions when I've supported the idea that the carried interest provisions that hedge fund managers take care of, et cetera, ought to be changed because that is income for them.
So you, a moderate Republican, would support the Democratic plan?
Well, I don't know.
Other than it gives a victory to the Democrats.
I don't know that I'm a moderate. I'm a pretty conservative Republican.
Okay, well then even better.
But yes, those are things that I can do. I do, however, believe, as do most Republicans, that ought to be addressed within the realm of comprehensive tax reform, which may wind up generating additional revenue, and not in the shadow of the sequester, which is all about cutting spending.
Well, first of all, most Republicans that I know that have talked about tax reform always talk about it being revenue neutral. They don't talk about generating extra revenue. That's something we Democrats usually talk about.
No, I believe, the whole presidential campaign, Mitt Romney said, okay, we're going to do tax reform. We're going to close loopholes in return for lower tax rates for everyone, including corporations.
And he said it would be revenue neutral.
Well, we all knew that it was going to generate a little bit of extra money, not gobs of extra money, but when you close the loopholes and you let the market take place, then, you're going to have dynamic growth and you're going to have additional money.
Okay, but here's the deal. The Republican plan, as you've cited it, simply allowing administrators to decide where to cut in a broader basis rather than cutting everything in equal percentage, that makes sense. You've described the Democratic provisions, ending the carried interest rate, the Buffett tax, and also agricultural subsidies. It's things that you could support. Sounds like both parties are being reasonable. It also sounds to me like they're not coming to an agreement. For these reasonable positions, it's got to be pure politics.
All right, before you lock me into being in favor of the Buffett rule.
You want a different place.
No. The Buffett rule is that everybody pays at least 30% in the upper income bracket.
Right.
I happen to think it's immoral to pay more than 25%. So I'm totally opposed to the Buffett rule.
But you agree that hedge fund managers shouldn't have a cheaper rate than other very rich people.
I told you that if it really ought to be defined as income for
ordinary
income
rather than capital gains,
then it ought to be taxed as ordinary income.
Okay, but here's my point. You have said the Democratic proposals are things that you could come to support maybe in a different context. I've said that the Republican proposal is something that I could come to support. We're being reasonable here. What's going on in Congress? Isn't it just pure politics at this point?
I think it's, in Congress they may even find a deal. I think the president's the one who's playing politics.
The president will not veto a deal, I assure you. If Harry Reid and Mitch McConnell and the House come to a deal, President Obama's not going to veto it.
We'll see. As I said, I think the tax reforms that you're talking about are the beginning of the tax reform. It's got to be in a grand bargain. For tax reform, I don't think it's going to be in something when we're talking about cutting spending, because this is about spending the sequester. It's not about revenues.
Mike, we've been trying for
I'll come back and I'll do it the very next day.
We've been trying for a grand bargain since the summer of 2011. Boehner and President Obama got together. They thought they had the outlines of a grand bargain. Both came away, blamed the other. Then came the fiscal cliff.
Mark,
December 31st, they talked again about a grand bargain. Actually, forget the commission. The commission, Erskine Bowles was supposed to be a grand bargain. Then summer of 2011 was a grand bargain. Then they had a commission appointed to do a grand bargain. That failed. Then came the fiscal cliff. They were going to do a grand bargain December 31st. That failed. You're not really telling me we're going to get a grand bargain between now and March 1st.
No.
That ain't happening.
I misused the term grand bargain, which is all-encompassing.
Right.
I think we have. Look, we've already addressed the tax part. We had the huge tax increase in January. Huge tax increase in January. Now it's time to address the spending side.
Mike.
If we address the spending side now, then we come back, and I think the third piece of the puzzle is tax reform, where we eliminate all their loopholes in return for reducing the overall tax rates on everyone, particularly those big, bad, awful, nasty corporations, which are now paying 10% higher as their maximum thing than any other country in the world.
Right, and because 2% make that payment.
We're not competitive.
Half of all corporations pay zero taxes at all.
Well, then if we're not going to lose anything, then let's lower it to 25% where the rest of the world is, so that
President Obama
we're not...
is fine with lowering corporate tax rates as long as everybody pays. What the Republicans seem to want is they still want half the corporations to pay zero, and then they want to lower the rate on the top
We
ones.
want to get rid of the loopholes that allow those corporations to pay
That's what President Obama
zero.
wants.
Well, I don't think he does.
Well,
but
let's do some tax reform. But before we even get to tax reform, that ain't going to happen in a week.
No.
The sequester
No,
will happen.
Right now,
the
the next 7 days is about cutting spending. We did the tax piece.
Okay.
Now we're going to do the spending piece, and then we'll do the tax reform piece down the road.
Erskine Bowles said that we needed $2.6 billion in taxes. And the $2.6 billion, the original Erskine Bowles proposal. We have gotten $600 million or $0.6 billion from the partial agreement to raise income taxes on not just rich over $250,000, but really rich people over $400,000. And now we have deficits as far as the eye can see. That's not sufficient. That was just to get us past December 31st. What Erskine and Bowles say, that's the bipartisan commission that Paul Ryan even sometimes supports and sometimes he doesn't, says that we need more in taxes and more cuts in spending. This deal has got to have both or it's not going to happen.
Well, then I think we're just going to have the sequester then, because we've dealt with the tax piece. We did that in January. It's now time to deal with the spending piece. And if the president is not going to focus and deal with the spending piece, and the Democrats in Congress are not going to deal with the spending piece,
they will. They've offered both.
Then the other side is going to be the sequester.
Offered
and
both.
The sequester is not Armageddon. You know what? The sun is going to come up in the east, and Godzilla is not going to eat Tokyo if we get the sequester.
And I actually think that's part of what Republicans want. I think Republicans want to see the sequester happen because there'll be longer lines on airplanes. Food safety is going to be a little bit suspect. We may have to close down some of the national parks. I mean, there are definitely things that are going to happen. I just read a letter to the editor of the Washington Post, a guy in the patent office. Patents will be slower granted, and that's going to harm American industry. All these effects will happen. They're relatively small. They're not Armageddon, I'll grant you that. But they will slow down not just the government, but commerce in America.
You know what? This is really about the spending piece. Now, what we will do, or what the Republicans are doing and will do in the House this week, is to give the president the flexibility to pick and choose to hit the same targets, but to decide what is the most important to preserve and what is the most, the most cuttable and things like that. That will come out of the House this week. There's no doubt that that's going to come out of the House this week.
And, of course, the devil's in the details. Will it be that a cabinet-level officer can distinguish among sub-cabinet levels? That's all very complicated. Here's, I guess, the heart of why, one of the reasons why I brought in this Time magazine article. You say it's all about spending. The single largest component of our federal budget, the one that's going way out of whack, way bigger than everything else, is health care. That's the thing that Social Security is pretty sound. It's Medicare that's not so sound. Medicaid.
Social Security is not sound.
Social Security is sound for a good 40 years. We're fine with Social Security. The point is, but you would agree with everything about Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, it's health care costs that are really driving the federal budget. They're driving 60% of Americans into bankruptcy. And what this article points out is rather than focus on how are we going to pay these very high costs, it says, why are these costs that high to begin with? That's what I want to explore with you when we come back. Folks, if you want to join the discussion, please do so. The toll-free number is 888-488-MARK, 888-488-6275, or you can dial locally 571-749-11.
Too many women get hit by their boyfriends and husbands. Too many women are pressured into having unprotected sex. Half of the people in the world living with AIDS are women. It doesn't have to be this way. Together, we can change this reality. Let's strive for a world free of violence.
At Volunteers of America, we don't just give kids a way to stay off the streets. We give them the tools they need to reach their full potential. We don't just help the elderly receive needed care. We help them live life to the fullest. We don't just provide food for homeless individuals and families. We provide job training and placement so they can buy groceries. Volunteers of America is a national organization that for over 100 years has provided programs and services that allow people to overcome their challenges to become vital members of their community. At Volunteers of America, we don't just help people, we help people help themselves. Find out how you can support the programs that are working in your community. Contact Volunteers of America today. Call 1-800-899-0089.
Drivers face all kinds of distractions.
Guys, stop playing. No.
Of 127 consecutive.
Before your wireless phone becomes one of them, stop. Drive safely. Keep your phone in easy reach and dial sensibly. In bad weather or traffic, call later and use a hands-free device. Remember, with wireless, safety is your call.
We're back to the Inside Scoop. Here again, your host.
Welcome back to the Inside Scoop. This is Mark Levine. My guest is Mike Lane. He's a Republican strategist, talking about the issues of the day. And one of the biggest issues, and I think really, I'm almost surprised it hasn't come up sooner, is a cover article in Time magazine. The author is Stephen Brill. It happens to be the longest article ever in Time magazine, but I found it engrossing and well worth your time. It gives a litany of examples of people being forced to pay very, very high health care bills. And it asks the question very reasonably, rather than focus as Obamacare does, for example, and as advocates focus on all the uninsured and how we can make sure that they can pay their bills, how about focusing on why this is so expensive to begin with? In example after example, they give overcharges to Medicare, overcharges to insurance companies, and overcharges most of all to the people that don't have insurance or don't have Medicare. It's a process so secret that hospitals saying, don't look at the man behind the curtain. That man or list is called the charge master, and they set outrageous prices. Things like gauze that cost 50 cents but cost you $20. Things like, there's a whole host of examples. There are pills that could cost a company $5, that they charge you $500. The point is that hospitals particularly, also insurance companies, also doctors, also medical equipment manufacturers, but nonprofit hospitals are giving their administrators millions and millions of dollars, far more than even the heads of universities. And we haven't focused on this aspect of the problem, which I would argue, and I think the article argues quite well, is the main problem. Mike, what did you think of the article?
Well, surprise, surprise. People are making a lot of money off different things. You know, it happens in every industry. When you look at the way this particular article is presented, you say, well, that's not right. But it's not, it's not right. I'm less concerned about the de minimis expenses where they, might mark it up 1,000% or something like that. I mean, they do that all the time.
Or 10,000%?
Yeah,
100 times.
You ever get your car repaired and in there, after you get your brakes done and your oil change and stuff like that, they have a shop fee of $25. Well, that covers the 3 cents worth of grease that they used on your car and probably 2 5-cent screws. But they get you $25 for it anyway. So every industry does it because medical care costs so much. We're focused on that. I don't like the ones where maybe it's a treatment, a significant treatment that maybe is a $4,000 treatment and they charge $13,000 for it or something like
or
that.
Or $40,000 for it. I mean, Mike, one of the things this article points out, first of all, is these profit margins are far in excess of anything you see in the other business. They give the example of Apple.
Except for Apple.
No, they give the example of Apple. And they say Apple can sometimes have a markup up to 40%, but Apple never has a markup of 1,000%. They don't charge 10 times what it costs them. They give examples of hospitals charging 50 times what
Apple
it costs
doesn't sell things piecemeal. If you bought an Apple mouse, I'm sure it would be close to 1,000% markup for that.
No, it wouldn't be.
But not on a computer system. It's a...
Look, the problem with hospitals is unlike Apple or computer manufacturer, I can choose another computer manufacturer. Mm-hmm. I actually get to see the prices up front. I can go to their website and find out exactly what they charge. Not so if I go to the emergency room. If I'm bleeding, they will take me to the nearest hospital, and they will charge me whatever they want. They won't let me know the prices in advance. They might just let me die or lie there bleeding, but if it's going to cost me $100,000 to sew my arm, or in the case that this gave, there was a woman that thought she had a heart attack. She actually just had indigestion.
Right.
She went to the hospital, and they ended up charging her $25,000. Rolaids is I don't know, $1, $2. It ain't $25,000.
I think they probably get them for 3 cents a piece.
Whatever it is, the point is that these charges, they don't let you know them in advance. When you're getting the hospital, you rarely have a chance to bargain. Oh, you know what? I might just let my arm, dangle and fall off because I don't agree with your prices. Hospitals are not like computer manufacturers. I would argue that a hospital is a lot more like your water company. When you get water from your water company, water's pretty cheap. It is. But if you're dying of thirst, water is more valuable to you than diamonds. And you will pay virtually everything to get that last drop of water. I would argue that hospitals treat us much like a water supplier that's letting you die of thirst.
All right, Mark, there's a couple of things on the economics here, but we may not be as far apart on this at the end as
it's a natural monopoly,
as you hope we
and
are.
should be regulated.
Well,
as such.
It's not. No, I'm not going to meet you there. But here's one of the things you got to understand. The first is they give the example of Medicare, which covers things at the cost of what the hospital is charged, including staffing, administration.
No, the article points out
that.
Medicare is paying 3, 4, 5 times their cost.
No.
And then private pays even in excess of that.
Medicare actually pays about 94 cents on the dollar for what it costs them to actually deliver the treatment. It does. So when it comes to
but not the hospital. I just want to be very clear on this. If the hospital costs the hospital $100, they'll still charge Medicare for $400 or $500. They'll charge you or me $2,000 or $5,000, but they're still charging Medicare 3 and 4 times the cost.
Medicare is known for paying 94 cents on the dollar. I don't know if Brill's figures are accurate or not.
They pay 94 cents on the dollar of what the hospital asked them to pay. But what they asked them to pay is a grossly inflated cost.
The other thing you have to cover is the people who have no coverage, who are big consumers and using a lot. So you have to make up that as well. Now, the people who are going to pay for both of these programs that don't pay their way, the indigents and the government payers, is the people who have their own insurance. So they're obviously going to pay well in excess of what they would normally have to charge if they were in their own pool without consideration to everybody else. Now, having said that,
I can't believe you're justifying
I'm
this.
not. No, absolutely not. No, having said that, and establishing the fact that you are, if you're adequately insured, you're going to pay a significant amount more than it actually costs to deliver the service to you. I still think that their fees are outrageous, and
their profits are outrageous. So-called non-profit hospitals are paying their administrators millions of dollars. Now, these millions of dollars are exactly what's causing 60% of all bankruptcies are because of health care. And they're also doing things like cancer treatment drugs that cost hundreds of thousands of dollars to people who are dying. And they know that they can push a whole bunch of things. Someone's dying. They're not looking at the price tag. They're saying, save my husband, save my wife. And lo and behold, it does very little at all. And they can charge them hundreds of thousands of dollars. They give them tests that are unnecessary. This is a problem that cries out for regulation.
No, it's a problem that cries out for disclosure. I think
disclosure and regulation.
I think that I would be very comfortable with hospitals and doctors publishing their price list. This is what we get for a Tylenol.
That's a minimum. That's a minimum, and I would love to see that. I have to tell you, I have a cholesterol medication, and I went to change providers, to change my insurance providers because they kept raising my rates, and I wanted to find out what my pills would cost under the new insurance plan. Well, the insurance company refused to tell me. We're not going to tell you what it's going to cost. I called the drug manufacturer. Oh, we can't tell you what it costs. I called the pharmacy. We can't tell you what it costs. We can only tell you what it costs after you have ordered it. I checked plans and I made the order, and knowing that I could still cancel it within 10 days. And they said, we will not fulfill your order until after you've gotten outside the period where you can cancel our insurance.
Well, Mark,
once I finally got the insurance, I found out the cost of the drugs. It was about $600. And I'll tell you something. I'm going to get mine from Canada because the Canadian government looks out for consumers. The American government does not.
If we would reform the healthcare insurance industry to allow companies to market across state lines, which we don't, we would get more competition in it. And instead of having to deal with a company that plays hide the ball from you, you could play with one that's going to compete on the basis of giving you information, and you could make intelligent consumer-based choices rather than this thing in the dark that you don't know about.
You say that and transparency, I fully agree, is a good thing, but I don't think it's sufficient. If I'm being brought in by an emergency room because I have a gunshot wound, can I really go and say, oh, you want to charge me all my life savings to take this bullet out of my heart? No, I'll risk my life to go to a hospital that's in another state, say. You mentioned state regulation. I'll go to Delaware, 2 hours. I may die, but I'm not going to let you take my life savings. Instead, people sign on the dotted line. To me, when a terrorist takes a hostage and says, sign here, promise us to give you all your wealth, and the person signs, we know under the law that that's called unconscionability. That's called force. Duress. That's right. And we say that signature doesn't count. To me, anyone that signs saying, I promise to pay a hospital bill of any cost that you don't present me in advance because I'm dying, All of those contracts are invalid. People should not have to pay those bills.
Well, that's why insurance companies have contracts with providers to specify the costs out, and they'll do it for you. Now, what the consumer can do is be a little bit more cognizant of it and shop around for the various coverage plans
for things that aren't emergencies.
Well, no, I mean, you're going to,
this woman thought she was having a heart attack. She just had indigestion, and they charged her $25,000.
And my recollection was it was closer to $9,700, but, there may have been two examples.
No, I think this was $25,000.
Whatever it was, they're both outrageous.
Of course they are.
It's just absolutely ludicrous.
Of course they are.
And
what is to be done about it? The Democratic solution is to say that hospitals are a lot like your water company or your electric company. It is a natural monopoly. You regulate them. You allow them a 5% profit, just like we allow the gas company or the water company, but we don't allow these outrageous 1,000% charges.
Mark, our viewers may not know that you and I live within about 3 blocks of each other.
That's true.
Now, in our particular area, we have a choice of about 8 different hospitals.
We live in Northern Virginia, where we have a lot of choice.
And there's probably more than that. If you want to go to Loudoun County or anything like that, there's even more.
I guarantee you, in rural Virginia, there's far less choice. There's probably, if you go to southwestern Virginia, there's probably one hospital.
And I'll guarantee you, those are the hospitals that are making less money than the ones here are in Northern Virginia too. Look, if you start having them publish their price lists. And
you'd be okay with requiring that by law?
I'd talk to you about it, yeah.
You talk to me about it?
I'd talk to you about it. I mean, I think that disclosure is a good thing. And I think that, if somebody's charging $82 for a regular
piece of gauze
for a generic Tylenol tab,
right,
or a piece of gauze, then if they publish that, guess what? That $82 is going to become $8.20.
Which is why they will never publish it unless you force them by law to do so.
I told you, I talked to you about it.
Okay, well, I agree with that. But I also think that saying to them that they can't treat them like, look, do you disagree with how we treat the water company and the gas company? These natural monopolies, because I can't have 10 water companies all shipping water to my home. So I only have one. It's Virginia American Water Company. They're regulated by the state. They can make a 4 or 5% profit every year, so they're in business. But we make sure that I get the water I need and I'm not charged outrageous rates. It works for my water company. It works for my gas company. It works for my electric company. Why shouldn't it work for my local hospital?
First of all, I don't know where you're paying your electric rates, but I think they're pretty outrageous these days.
They're high, but they're not as high as Inova charged me for 1 day in the hospital.
All right, look, healthcare is not a commodity delivered by a utility. Healthcare is something that's very personal, that's important to the people. When you turn on your tap, you're going to get, water. I think when you're talking about your individual health, it's a very personal decision. It's a very personal thing to you. You want to make sure that you're going to be okay. You want to select your doctor. You don't want to just take what the tap gives you.
But you know what?
This is not
generic Tylenol is generic Tylenol, and ibuprofen is ibuprofen, and gauze is gauze. And we're not talking about doctors. I didn't mention doctors at all. I'm talking about standard medical pills and equipment that are pretty cheap, and we're being charged too much.
I concur that the expenses the charges are a little bit outrageous.
Which is why we need regulation, but we'll get to that.
Need disclosure.
Because we also need regulation about guns, which is in the next segment. I'm going to talk about what's likely to come through Congress right after.
Around the world, 1 out of every 3 women will be beaten or otherwise abused in their lifetime, often by a family member or loved one. A future free from violence. It's all she's ever wished for.
Did you know you have the power to stop children from joining gangs? You can help a father find a job and home for his family. You can assist a woman who can't afford the medicine she needs to live and the home she can't live without. You can choose to make a difference in our community. Support Volunteers of America, and you can help improve the lives of nearly 2 million Americans each year with programs and services that help individuals and families overcome their challenges to become as independent as possible. Support the programs that are working in our community. Contact Volunteers of America today. Call 1-800-899 888-0089.
For some folks, saving for the future is easy, but for you, it might take a little more effort. Saving for your future is your responsibility, and there's a lot to save for.
I never thought of that.
Like your child's education, perhaps uncovered medical expenses, or just to be sure you can live the way you want when you retire. The time is now to save for tomorrow. Save now or work forever. The choice is yours. Choose to save.
Regulation. Not only do I think healthcare needs to be regulated, but I would argue that guns need to be regulated because I don't believe that every single insane person or violent felon or terrorist should be able to own an AK-47. I don't think that's against the Second Amendment because I don't think that insane people, terrorists, or violent felons can be well regulated in a militia, as the Second Amendment talks about. I know that there are some that disagree, but it looks to me like background checks. The idea that there won't be a gun show loophole, that the 40% of guns and weaponry and bullets that's sold without any background checks, they may finally end it. I think it's going to come, and I think it's going to come in March. The other thing I'd like to see, a limitation of ammunition, making sure that magazines have no more than 10 bullets. That one seems tougher politically. I'm going to discuss both of them with my guest, Mike Lane. So, Mike, let me start with the background checks. Now, you told me, I don't know, it was a month ago or so, no gun control legislation was ever going to get through Congress. National Rifle Association is too strong. Do you still stand by that prediction with regard to background checks? Because I think we're going to get it.
I do stand by it.
Really?
I don't
Not
think,
even background checks?
I don't think we're going to get it because I think that the administration is going to try and, insist on too much. They're not going to fall back and...
I think they'll separate the bills. They'll do background checks as one, ammunition clips as another,
right.
Assault weapons as another. Right. I support all three, but I think background checks, you would agree, is the strongest of the three.
I think it's got the best possibility,
right.
but here's the problem, Mark. How do you enforce it? I mean...
Simple.
First of all, the idea of a gun show loophole is not a gun show loophole. What the so-called gun show loophole is a private sale loophole.
That's right.
So if I have a weapon that I want to sell to you in a private sale, how are you going to enforce this? I mean, I see no enforcement mechanism at all.
The same way you enforce it for a sale from a licensed gun manufacturer. What they do is when they want to sell you a gun, you have to fill out a form.
Right.
All right? They fill out the form, they send it in, they say, oh, you're not a violent felon, you're not insane, you get to have a gun, and that's fine. And usually the background check takes a few minutes. It's very quick. The people in the gun shows have the same access to the internet that the licensed gun dealers have. They make you fill out the form. So you're saying what happens if they don't? If they don't, it's a crime.
I'm saying a licensed gun dealer, in order to maintain their license, has to comply.
Right.
If you want to buy something from me and I sell it to you and under the table, how are you going to enforce this, Mark?
If I want to buy a car from you, all right, we have a form. It's called a title. It's a registration. Mm-hmm. And even if it's a private sale and none of us are going to any used car dealer, you have to sign on the dotted line that car belongs to me, or guess what? It's considered a stolen car if I have it.
No.
The same could be true with guns.
It's not that. Or guess what? You can't register that car.
That's right.
But since there is no gun registration and we're not going to have it, then there's no enforcement mechanism on it.
There actually is a registration depending on the state. There are states that do require licensed gun owners to register. Mm-hmm. Virginia's not one of them, but Illinois, I believe Maryland is one of them too.
Connecticut.
So there are states.
Connecticut has among the strictest gun laws in the country.
There are states that require that.
New York.
But my point is that it's not that hard to regulate the private sales. Frankly, it would require less bureaucracy than regulating private sales of cars, which we already do. This is something that could prevent crazy, insane, violent felons from getting guns. You know what? If I were a gun dealer, I would support this provision, because if I were a gun dealer and all of my sales have to go around background checks, and yet the guy at the gun show can sell the same weapons and he doesn't have to do the background checks, and he can sell them to the violent felons, and I can't. That's not fair to me.
99% of sales at gun shows are by licensed dealers and go through the gun check. It's only the private sales at the gun shows that don't go through that. So there are
all kinds of privates. 40% of all guns.
That's a specious number. I know the administration is using that, but they've never come up with their source on it.
I'll give you the source. It's a Seattle study. It's an old study. I'll admit it's a study from the 80s. It's a study in Seattle, Washington, in the 1980s. I mean, that's
I don't believe it. I don't believe it. I think
whatever the number
is, the case by 3 times.
If you support background checks for licensed gun dealers, which I think you do, right?
I think it's okay. Yeah.
Okay. Why not simply support them for everyone?
How are you going to enforce it? That's my question. I'm going to sell you
What's
something,
your question?
Mark.
If it's sold under the table, how do I enforce it? Very simple. If my gun is used in a crime and you sold it to me under the table without a background check,
how do you know?
You are civilly liable.
How do you know?
How do you know? We traced the gun to you.
How? There's nothing that's going to trace that gun to me. It's not, there's no record that has
Sure
me
there
owning
is.
that gun.
Sure there is. You sell the gun to Mr. Smith. Mr. Smith robs a bank. We catch Mr. Smith. We put him in jail, and we say, you know what? Tell us who sold you the gun, and instead of giving you 20 years, we'll give you 10 years. Oh, it's Mike Lane.
Okay.
We're going to get you in there, too.
Okay, that's
fine. And I'm
fine.
fine with that.
I'm
fine with that. If you sell a gun knowingly, after the law's passed, you knowingly sell a gun without a background check, and that gun is used in a crime, you should be held civilly liable. And maybe even criminally liable.
Well,
to some extent.
I'm not going to meet you halfway on that
People
one
who sell
yet,
alcohol to
but
kids who
finally
then have an accident, right? They are held civilly liable. If you sell drugs to someone and they overdose on the drugs, you are liable. If you sell a loaded gun to someone and you don't run a background check and that person happens to have been a convicted felon who had they undergone a background check, the sale wouldn't have been legal. Yes, you should be legally liable.
But Mark, I'm going to sell it to you. You're not a convicted felon. You're not a psycho wacko.
You got lucky.
You're a guy who. No, I'm selling it to somebody I know. I'm not selling it to just some. I'm not selling it to some guy off the street who says, "Hey, man, can you get me?" There's already laws against straw purchasers.
There may be people that have committed crimes of domestic violence that you didn't know about. There are people who have restraining orders you didn't know about. There are people that may be schizophrenic that you don't know about. This acquaintance that you met at the gym happens to have beaten his wife. You don't know those things. That's why we have background checks. Look, I only would have you legally liable if you sell it to someone who would have failed the check. I'm fine with that. If you sell it to someone who wouldn't have failed the check, then maybe we'll fine you $100 and say you should have undergone another check. So that's fine. But if you sell it to someone who would have been illegal, and remember, 1.5 million Americans were turned away for failing to undergo the background check at licensed dealerships. I can only imagine how many were then going to the gun shows.
Not for failure to undergo it, for failing the background check.
That's exactly right. They went to get a background check.
And that's a 10-year figure, right?
And that's right. But they failed. They failed because they were either violent felons or insane.
And they should fail.
Right.
And they should be denied.
Right. So if Mike Lane, you think you got a good friend, but you don't undergo a background check, which is really easy. It's a phone call or an internet thing. If you don't do it and you sell it to your guy at the gym who happens to be schizophrenic and goes out and shoots 30 people, should Mike Lane be legally liable? Absolutely.
Let me ask you this, Mark. Now I don't want to sell you anything. I don't have a gun. I'm just a guy. But I want to know something about Mark Levine. So I call this number up that you're telling me, and I say, yeah, my name's Joe, and I'm selling Mark Levine a gun. Can you tell me his background check things, et cetera?
You know what?
I think we've got a privacy issue here.
Most criminal records are public record anyway. The insane is more difficult. I'll grant you that. I mean, just about everyone that's a violent felon, that's public record. You can look. You can do that. You can do that right away.
Yes,
so that's not an issue. When it comes to insanity, or
any mental health. The mental health lobby is adamant that none of this stuff gets disclosed ever.
Well, first of all, I think there's mental health and there's mental health, right? I mean, someone's depressed. We're not going to say you can't sell them a gun because they're depressed. Someone who's a schizophrenic and has, violent tendencies.
Right. But the mental health lobby absolutely insists on 100% privacy. They are not willing to share this data.
Well, how about we start with violent felons? Can you agree with me on that?
I'm totally good with violent felons.
Okay, all right. Now, how about people on the terrorist watch list? They should be able to get a gun.
No, because you can wind up on the terrorist watch list for any reason.
Then get your name off.
Then how do you do that? How do you fight a government bureaucracy?
I'm
not willing to do that.
No, it's very simple. I say, Mike, I want to sell you a gun. You say, great. I go, oh, Mike Lane, the international terrorist. I say, sorry, Mike, the background check says you're an international terrorist. Then you contact them.
No.
The same way.
It doesn't say
that. We have
that.
a no-fly list right now. And if you are on the no-fly list, you contact them and they give you a special credential to say that you're allowed to fly on a plane. That's how it works right now. It seems to me that flying on a plane is not as important. Really, it's selling you a gun. I mean, I'd rather have a known terrorist on a plane than a known terrorist with a gun.
You have more faith in the efficiency of government than I do. There's no way that, first of all, being put on the no-fly list is not something that you have to be background investigated for. I mean, you got bureaucrats that just add people to this list.
Are you saying that it shouldn't be a no-fly list?
No, but you have...
You support the no-fly list, even though it's imperfect.
But because some bureaucrat administratively added me to a list, either for nefarious reasons or out of mistake or incompetence or something like that, you're then going to deny me my constitutional rights?
Which is a more important freedom? My right to fly from this state to another state, or my right to own a gun? Which is more important for my freedom? I would argue freedom to travel is a lot more important than freedom to shoot a weapon.
Mark, you have a constitutional right to have a gun.
You have a constitutional right to travel.
You don't have a constitutional right to move about the cabin.
Well, you don't have to move about the cabin. Let me ask you this. If you got a terrorist that goes through security on a plane, all right, I don't like him to be on a plane because he could manhandle somebody, but if he has no weapon, I'd be a lot more afraid of a terrorist with a gun than a terrorist on a plane. I also think it's more dangerous. We have this no-fly list. It seems to work most of the time. If it doesn't work, there are procedures to get your name off.
But there are such egregious
examples. You might
examples.
have to wait 20 days to get a gun because someone accidentally put your name on the no-fly list.
And if someone's stalking you right then and you have a need for protection in the immediate future...
You call the police and you get some mace,
The police aren't going to do anything for you.
Come on. I don't believe that the government's as bad as you think they are. We both live in Alexandria.
Look, Mark,
the Alexandria police, I find, are very good, and they come very quickly.
The Alexandria police will be there usually within about 4 or 5 minutes.
They're very
quick.
If
somebody's beating down your door, 4 or 5 minutes is nowhere near fast enough.
Well, it's not time to buy a gun either, right? You go get a restraining order.
But if you had one with you...
If you have one with you, actually, statistics show that guns in the home are 43 times more likely to be used against someone in the home than in self-defense.
Well,
they've compared the number of self-defense.
That's their choice.
You have the right to have a gun for self-defense. I'm not against that. But what I'm saying is we'll make people undergo a background check. I am confident that a lot of the recent incidents we've seen, whether in Newtown, Connecticut, whether in Tucson, Arizona, whether that crazy guy in Colorado, many of these incidents could have been prevented with a background check.
I will grant you, of all the things that they're talking about, the background check has probably the best chance of being enacted.
I think it will be.
You haven't convinced me that it's going to work. It's much ado about nothing. I mean, it's just...
The fact that 1.5 million Americans were turned away because of a background check, doesn't that suggest to you that background checks work?
It does, yes.
Okay, and therefore more of them, more Americans, for more sales is a good thing.
I just don't.
We won't catch every one of them.
How?
Maybe only 3 million and not 3.5 million.
How am I going to force you to do it? I just don't understand.
Very simple.
Your enforcement mechanism.
Very simple. If you don't do it, we hold you legally liable. It's that simple. And if you know that you can be put in jail if you sell a gun to the wrong guy, you might want to do that 10-minute background check, because otherwise you'll.
Right.
Say we tell bartenders, you can't give a drink to someone who's legally drunk because you can be legally liable. And bartenders sometimes listen to that. I think if you know that if you sell a gun to somebody who's crazy and you don't do a background check, you can be legally in trouble, you're less likely to do it. Will it be perfect? No, of course it won't. Before we end, though, we only got 50 seconds. Limitation of magazine clips to 10. I realize that's less likely to pass, but it doesn't make sense to me. The only problem is if you have a gun, you might have to change the clip, and it might take you 3 seconds from your hunting and target practice. This is the kind of thing that could have saved lives in Arizona, Colorado, Connecticut. Briefly, we may do a little more after the break.
On a magazine, there's no reason why a private citizen should have a lesser magazine than the government has. A standard issue is a 30-round clip. I agree. I would never buy a 100-round clip, a 50-round drum or something like that. There's no reason why I should not be able to have a 30-round clip. It's a standard issue. Why would...
Mike, this idea that every citizen should have the same weaponry the government has, I want to chat with you about that after the break. And then I also want to move on and talk about the situation in Syria, where I've been quite strongly against the president's policy. Folks, if you want to call in, last chance to do so, 888-4884.
I need a job.
Necesito trabajo. I would like to speak English better. Me gustaría hablar inglés mejor.
I want to be a U.S. citizen.
Quisiera ser ciudadano de los Estados Unidos.
For over 35 years,
por más de 35 años,
the Hispanic Committee of Virginia has been serving our community.
El Comité Hispano de Virginia ha estado sirviendo a nuestra comunidad.
Job training and placement,
capacitación, ayuda para conseguir trabajo,
education for children and adults,
educación para niños y adultos,
immigration, naturalization, and medical referrals,
ayuda para los procesos de inmigración y naturalización y orientación sobre médicos,
are a small part of what we do.
Son solo una pequeña parte de lo que hacemos.
For help, information, or to volunteer,
para ayuda, información o para ofrecerse como voluntario,
contact the Hispanic Committee of Virginia.
Comuníquese con el Comité Hispano de Virginia,
helping everyone participate more fully in American society.
Ayudando a todos a participar plenamente en la sociedad norteamericana.
Where's yours?
Would you notice if you were missing half your kidney function? According to the National Kidney Foundation, 20 million people have chronic kidney disease, and 20 million more may be at risk and not even know it. Anyone with high blood pressure, diabetes, or family history of chronic kidney disease is at risk. Early diagnosis is vitally important. To get the whole story, talk to your doctor and visit the National Kidney Foundation at kidney.org or call for a free brochure. Because when it comes to chronic kidney disease, you might not know the half.
Welcome back to the Inside Scoop. I'm your host, Mark Levine. My guest is...
Here again, your host.
Welcome back to the Inside Scoop. I'm your host, Mark Levine. My guest is Mike Lane, Republican strategist. I want to finish up our talk about guns and then move on to Syria. So we talked about background checks. I agree with you that it's less likely to pass Congress, the restriction on ammunition clips, but I don't understand why. Every person I've ever had on my show who hunts tells me you don't need a clip of more than 10 to shoot a deer. You shoot twice, the deer runs away, and frankly, if you can't hit a deer in 10 shots, you're not that good a hunter anyway. If you want to go after birds, you use buckshot out of a shotgun. You can shoot 40 at once, so you don't need semi-automatic machine guns. It's not useful for hunting. For self-defense, well, unless you've got, 30 people coming at you at once, you probably don't need it for self-defense either. Most burglars, break-ins, 1, 2, 3, maybe 4 people. 10 bullets should be sufficient. And to me, if you've got 20 people out to get you, you're probably Chris Dorner, and you've probably shot somebody, and the state is out to get you. I actually like the fact that our police normally outgun our criminals. I want it to be that way. You made a statement before the break that really surprised me. You said if the government has a right to weaponry, then I have that right. Do you really want to stick by that statement? Because if you do, I want to go out and get myself an M16 tank, because I like to ride in tanks.
No, Mark, the Constitution only guarantees us the right to bear arms. It doesn't guarantee us the right to drive tanks or fly M16s or drive aircraft carriers.
I can bear anthrax. You fine with that? Just sell anthrax in the open market?
No. That's not arms. Firearms are a very specifically defined thing. The Constitution defines.
So a nuclear suitcase, a dirty bomb. I can carry that.
No, that's not a firearm. That's a firearm is something very specific. It started off in the days of the Founding Fathers with muskets. And now we're talking about the modern-day equivalent of muskets.
And once you shoot one bullet out of a musket, you have to tamp down, put another one, and a minute later, you're ready to shoot one again. You know what? I am fine with everyone having a right to a musket. I'm fine with that.
Now we want the modern-day equivalent of muskets, which are AR-15s and things like that.
Well, why not a machine gun? That's an arm, and you can carry it.
You know what? You can make an argument that you should be able to have
since 1933.
And they banned it because there were too many,
mob-style,
Machine Gun Kelly, people
John
like
Dillinger,
that.
Absolutely. Are you opposed to the banning of machine guns?
I think that I would.
Maybe you are. Let's be consistent, Mike. Are you opposed to banning machine guns?
I think that I don't fear fully automatic weapons in the hands of the citizens, but that's not a fight that we're fighting today. What we're fighting today is...
The citizens, including mafia and drug dealers and all those other citizens.
The Founding Fathers wanted the government to fear the citizens. It's not just about hunting. It's not just about self-defense. It's about a government that fears its people, will not overreach, will not be oppressive, and will not be tyrannical. And,
you know what? I've heard people say that about the Second Amendment, which, of course, I always point out, because it always bears repeating what the language is. A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. I don't think George Washington supported that view, and the reason I don't is because he had a whiskey rebellion when he was president of the United States. Farmers in western Massachusetts didn't want to pay their excise taxes, and they revolted against the government. And George Washington sent out a well-regulated militia and put them down. And so I don't think that George Washington agrees that the government should fear its armed citizens. I don't think any of the founders really believe that. I realize people say that today.
Let me quote, I think it's Jefferson. The tree of liberty must be watered from time to time with the blood of patriots and tyrants.
Well, that was because Thomas Jefferson supported going after King George III and the British.
Right.
Right.
And he said a little rebellion every now and again is a good thing.
Against a dictatorship. Listen,
Right.
you're about to hear
Mark,
me in a couple minutes support the rebels in Syria. So clearly I agree that when you have an oppressive dictatorship, you should be able to fight against them. But we have nothing close to that in America.
We have legislation pending in California, Colorado, Connecticut that will come out and forcibly take guns from the citizenry. That is tyrannical, and that ought to be resisted.
You know what? We forcibly take guns out of the hands of people that we send to prison first, and I see nothing wrong with that.
I see nothing wrong with that either.
I see nothing wrong with telling ordinary citizens they can't have anthrax tanks or dirty bombs.
I agree.
I also say
absolutely
that
agree.
we can ban machine guns and semi-automatic weapons, and particularly these ammunition clips, because what do you need them for? Because you're enjoying target practice, and oh no, it takes 3 seconds to switch. That's enough to save a child's life. That I guarantee you, if Adam Lanza had to keep switching his magazines out, we would have had maybe 5 dead kids instead of 20 dead kids. The same is true in Arizona. The same is true in Colorado.
I'm a law-abiding citizen. I serve my country in the United States Marine Corps.
No one's attacking you.
I'm highly trained in the use of firearms.
How long does it take you to change a clip?
Including the AR-15.
3 seconds?
A standard issue clip that I was given was a 30-round magazine.
Okay.
Why should I be denied the opportunity to do what I've done my whole life?
Because people are dying. Because we have 32,000
But you're infringing my rights. Let's figure out how to get those other people and not me.
You know what? The 3 seconds that you have to undergo to change your gun clip is a lot easier for you than going to the DMV, which you don't like, but you willingly do as a citizen. People are dead, Mike, because of these gun clips. I mean, the only reason we stopped the guy in Arizona was because he had to change his clip.
Let me tell you.
The only reason the Colorado guy stopped is because he ran out of bullets.
When I was going through weaponry training, if I took 3 seconds to change a clip, my gunnery sergeant would have had a lot of things to say to me.
There you go. So you can do it in 1 second. But that's exactly my point. It's no real infringement on you to take an extra second after shooting 10 targets.
A standard issue is a 30-round magazine.
Well, let's change
I'm never going to buy a 50. I'm never going to buy 100.
Let's change the standard issue to 10. What would be the grand harm to the American freedom of requiring you to spend a second every time you shoot 10 bullets?
Well,
a second of your life versus hundreds and thousands of lives saved. Come on.
Again, the tree of liberty must be watered from time to time with the blood of patriots and tyrants.
And not with the blood of little children you're talking about.
I agree. Absolutely.
All right. Let me talk about real rebellion, because unlike the American government, which I do not think, you may disagree with the things it does, but I certainly don't think it's anything close to tyranny. We do have a constitutional republic that has withheld pretty well, and frankly, if a citizen does try to take on the U.S. government, he ends up like Chris Dorner, with or without a weapon. He ends up dead. In Syria, of course, there's nothing like that. In Syria, the government is killing its own people. The Syrian Air Force is bombing the Syrian people. Assad, the dictator, has massacred. We know of about 100,000 deaths. The amount is disputed. I've heard as little as 70,000. I've heard as much as 150,000. Syria does not allow any press in. A few intrepid journalists have gotten in. Some of them have gotten in trouble themselves. There's a massive civil war, and it's getting worse because we haven't been arming the Free Syrian Army, the rebels, the people who are Democrats. Al-Qaeda sees an opportunity. They're coming in. They're coming on the side of the rebels. Here's my concern. If Assad stays in power, we have an anti-American dictator who's just massacred hundreds of thousands of people and is out for further blood. That ain't good. If the rebels win with Al-Qaeda's help and arms, they come in, they hate America too because we didn't save their people, and now you have an Islamicist terrorist group. You have Afghanistan all over again. That's not good. It seems to me the only possible way out is support the ordinary Sunni Muslim free Syrian people who just want to live in freedom. They do exist, doctors and teachers and so forth, and the students just trying to live in a free country. They're not Al-Qaeda. They're not the Syrian government. It's time for President Obama to find those people. Hillary Clinton, by the way, said she could do it. Hillary Clinton said that she could find these people. She supported this. Petraeus supported this. And Leon Panetta supported it.
Leon Panetta supported it. Brennan supported it.
And Obama overruled them, and I think the president is wrong. I think I would start with a no-fly zone before the arms, because if we could do a no-fly zone and let the people, do it themselves, I don't want the arms going to the wrong people. So I would start with a no-fly zone like we did in Libya. But it seems to me that Obama was wrong to overrule his strong advisors, and it's not going to end pretty for the people of Syria or for American interests.
You forgot one more thing that makes it even uglier than you've just described it, which is that the Iranians are in there blown with both feet right now.
And Hezbollah and the Russians as well. That's right. So we either end up with an Iranian client state or an Al-Qaeda client state unless we act.
Well, okay.
Or we end up with just anarchy and massacre.
As you know, a year ago, I was all in for probably arming the rebels. Right now, I'm concerned. I don't have the intelligence, but the Al-Qaeda and the Iranians are in there in such numbers now that God only knows what those people really are. Secretary Clinton said, well, I can find the good ones. Well, okay. The problem is, it becomes like Egypt, where you don't stay involved afterwards and the bad guys wind up taking over like Morsi. But
at this point, it's bad guys versus beleaguered good guys. And what you have is Saudi Arabia and Qatar. They're helping the Islamic terrorist groups. You have Iran and Russia, and they're helping the Assad government. And no one's on the side of the vast majority of Syrian people who hate Assad and hate Al-Qaeda.
If the president would stay involved and engaged and work with the people to find the right leaders for the country and make sure that the country goes on the good path, then I would still be in favor of that. But the president's track record is he just walks away from it once the change is made. He doesn't stay involved. He doesn't stay engaged. And the entire Arab Spring has turned into a disaster, from end to end of the North African continent because we didn't involve ourselves.
I have been very clear in my opposition to President Obama on this. I was frankly surprised and pleased by us going into Libya the way we did. Libya is still a mess, but frankly, it's much better than it would have been, as far as I'm concerned, if either Gaddafi had remained in power or Al-Qaeda had taken over. Yes, the government doesn't have full control of the country. I'm not declaring Libya an A-plus success. But at least in Libya, you have a government that is neither Al-Qaeda, not Islamicist, not a terrorist group, not the old regime. They're trying very hard. They need our support. I think we could have done the same thing in Syria. I still think we can act. And I also want to be on the right side of history. When it comes to Cambodia or Rwanda or Darfur, too often we let these things happen and then only say we're sorry when it's too late. Bill Clinton, one of my favorite presidents, acted in Kosovo. I supported that at the time strongly. And I think that's a clear example of a war that was done for moral interests. The whole world says America only acts when oil's involved. Libya had oil. Syria does not. I want to show that we can act not just for oil, but for the people of the country.
I want to see the latest intelligence, which I'm not entitled to, so I'll never see it. If it can still be done, where we can identify the good people, work with them, take them to victory, get rid of Assad, and ensure that we work with them so that Al-Qaeda and Iran don't wind up taking over the country, then I'm with you.
I'll tell you something.
But I want those assurances.
I think it's being done. There's an article in the Washington Post today that says that whereas the northern groups were being financed by Al-Qaeda and Saudi Arabia and Qatar, they thought there's some new arms that are going to the southern groups through Jordan, through Daraa, near Damascus. They don't know where the arms are coming from, but it wouldn't surprise me if we find out a few years later that our CIA is funneling them through Saudi Arabia or whomever to get them to the rebels. I don't know that it's true. I do hope it's true. I actually don't think we have to do it secretly. I would do it quite openly. But if we're doing it secretly, that at least is better than nothing. The situation in Syria cannot continue the way it is. It's no good for the Syrian people.
I have no problem with covert operations if it's happening.
Let's hope so.
But you are exactly right. Assad is a cancer on the earth. He needs to be removed.
Absolutely.
We have to work with them. We can't walk away like we did in Egypt. We have to make it work.
Our time is up. I hope you've enjoyed the show. And if you want more information, go to marklevinetalk.com. Follow me on Twitter at marklevinetalk. Thanks, Mike. Enjoy the show. This is actually on Russian TV. Talking about Syria. Back in Obama.